The first time my brother raised his voice at me inside my own bakery. He was standing behind the counter I had tiled myself, pointing a finger in my face like I owed him something I hadn't thought to pay. Before I get into what happened that morning, do me a favor, hit that like button, and drop a comment letting me know where in Canada you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. It was a Tuesday in October. The display case was still half full of yesterday's croissants, and I hadn't even turned the open sign yet when the bell above the door chimed. My brother walked in first. My father came through right behind him, and my mother was last, pulling the door shut carefully, as though she was trying to keep the cold from following them inside. Nobody said good morning. Nobody smiled. My brother's jaw was tight. My mother's hands were clasped together, the way she holds them when she's rehearsed a difficult conversation in advance. And my father wouldn't quite look at anything. I had spent 6 years building everything around me. The building, the equipment, the small but loyal regulars who kept me going through 2 brutal pandemic years, through a burst pipe in January, through a February when I sold exactly 11 loaves in a single week and still showed up at 5:30 in the morning because I didn't know what else to do. None of what I had built came easily, and none of it had come from any of the 3 people standing in front of me. Let me tell you how I got here, because that part matters as much as anything else. I was 26 years old when I decided I wanted to own something. Not rent space inside someone else's building, not build a business on a lease that could be canceled with 60 days notice. Actually own the walls around me. At the time I was working as a baker at a small cafe in Kitchener, Ontario. 5:30 start, 6 days a week, smelling like bread flour and yeast by 7 in the morning. I liked the work, I was good at it. But I wasn't getting anywhere, and the day my landlord raised my apartment rent by $400 with 2 months' notice was the day I sat down and started doing arithmetic. If I moved out of my apartment and cut every expense that wasn't essential, I could save around $1,400 a month. It would take years to reach the kind of down payment I needed for a commercial property. But years would pass regardless, and I could either spend them saving or spend them standing still. I moved on to my friend's pull-out couch for 8 months. I picked up every extra shift the cafe would give me and took weekend catering contracts on my days off. I brought my lunch to work every single day and filled a thermos at home because even a medium coffee adds up when you're counting. I stopped buying clothes unless something wore out entirely. I didn't take a vacation for 3 years. Some months were so tight that I double-checked my account balance before buying groceries, just to be sure. But I kept the spreadsheet updated and I watched the number grow. And after 3.5 years, I had $64,000 set aside in a high-interest savings account at my credit union. I had also spent those years researching. I knew I wanted a property in a smaller Ontario town, somewhere with lower real estate prices but enough foot traffic to support a bakery. I looked at places within an hour of Kitchener. Listiful came up in a search one afternoon and I drove out the following Saturday. The main street was quiet and looked the way main streets in small Ontario towns always look. A hardware store, a pharmacy, a diner with a handwritten sandwich board, and on the corner, a 100-square-foot commercial unit with a for sale sign in the window and a storage room at the back that opened onto a rear laneway. The previous tenant had run a flower shop out of it for 12 years. The floors were worn in exactly the right places. The bones were good. The asking price was fair. I walked into my credit union and applied for a commercial mortgage loan. No cosigner, no guarantor, no family contribution. The loan officer reviewed my file, asked questions I was prepared for, and approved the application. The mortgage was registered in my name only and every payment came from my business account. That was the day I understood what it felt like to sign your name to something that is entirely yours. The first year was renovations done mostly on evenings and weekends. I tiled the counter myself over 3 consecutive Saturdays. I painted everything. I built the display shelving from kits I ordered online and assembled in the parking lot, because the space was too small to assemble them inside. I hired an electrician for the panel upgrade and a contractor for the commercial ventilation, and I managed both contracts myself down to the invoice. My parents came to visit once during that period. They had coffee, said the space was nice, and drove back to Kitchener. They didn't offer to help and I didn't ask them to. I had learned early not to expect it. By the time I turned 31, the bakery had 3 part-time employees, a wholesale account with 2 restaurants in town, and a Saturday morning line that sometimes stretched to the door. I had never been prouder of anything. Every crack in my imperfect tile work, every paint drip I'd missed on the baseboard, those imperfections were mine. I built this. Every dollar of it. That single fact should have been enough to end whatever my family tried to start before it ever reached me. Instead, it was exactly why they came after me. Everything began 5 days before that Tuesday morning. I had stayed late at the bakery going through invoices, and I was nearly asleep when my phone lit up on the nightstand. 11:47 p.m. The number was from a 514 area code, Montreal, and I didn't recognize it. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Is this the owner of the commercial property on Wallace Avenue North in Listowel? The voice was calm and unhurried. A man, likely older than me. Who's calling? I said. He told me his name was Mr. Pelletier. He said he represented a private lending company, operating across Ontario and Quebec. And then he said something that made me sit straight up in the dark. Your brother owes our company $48,000. I was quiet for a second. I'm not sure why you're telling me that. Because, he said, the property secured against that debt is registered to your name. I told him that was impossible. My brother had no ownership stake in my building. He had never had any financial interest in my business. He had no authority to attach my property to anything. That isn't what the documentation we received reflects, Mr. Pelletier said. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't trying to frighten me. He spoke the way someone speaks when they believe every word they're saying, and that quiet certainty was what frightened me most. He said his company had received what appeared to be a valid transfer of land, naming my brother as a co-owner of my commercial property. He said I had 30 days from the date of the call, before collection proceedings would begin against the collateral. Then the call ended. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after that, telling myself it had to be wrong. A mistake, or a misunderstanding, or some lie my brother had told that had gotten out of hand. I told myself there was no possible way a land document existed with my name on it that I hadn't signed. But I couldn't fully convince myself. I kept coming back to how certain that man had sounded. I called my brother the moment I hung up. It rang through to voicemail. I called again, same thing. I sent a text that said, "Call me right now. Someone just contacted me about your debt." Nothing came back. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I had decided I wasn't going to wait for anyone to explain anything to me. I called my mother. She picked up on the first ring, which struck me as odd for that hour. I hadn't even finished saying her name before she said, "Can you come for dinner Thursday? We should all sit down together." She hadn't asked what was wrong. She hadn't asked why I was calling early. She had asked me to come to dinner. I said yes, because I needed to see my brother's face when I asked him directly. Thursday evening I drove to my parents' house. My brother was already at the kitchen table. My father was near the counter, moving a cup from one spot to another, without any particular purpose. My mother put the kettle on and set out 4 mugs as though this were a routine evening, as though I had come over to talk about nothing in particular. I sat across from my brother and looked at him steadily. "Did you tell someone my building was being used as security for money you borrowed?" He looked at the table. "Answer me," I said. He rubbed the back of his neck. Nothing. My father cleared his throat. "We want to handle this as a family." "Handle what?" I asked. "Did he attach my property to a debt without asking me?" My mother sat down across from me. "You have the building," she said quietly and evenly, as though this were a reasonable exchange. "He's your brother. Family helps each other through things." Something cold moved through my chest. Nobody asked me to help. Someone called me at midnight to tell me my building is tied to a debt I had no knowledge of. She looked at me the way she does when she's decided in advance that I'm being difficult. "He's in trouble. That's what matters right now. How does his name appear on a document I never signed?" I looked back at my brother. "How does that happen?" The silence that came back was complete. My father looked into his mug. My mother folded her hands. My brother kept his eyes on the table in front of him. No one denied it. No one looked confused. No one acted as though what I was describing came as any surprise. They had invited me there, because they expected me to absorb this, accept it, and hand over what I had spent 6 years building, to protect my brother from a mess I had no part in making. I drove home with my hands rigid on the wheel, and nothing useful running through my mind. The next morning, I was at the land titles office, when the doors opened at 8:30. The clerk searched the file using my property address and handed me a printed transaction history. I sat at one of the public tables and went through it page by page. Most of it was familiar. The original transfer from my purchase, the mortgage registration, municipal tax confirmations. Then I reached a document filed 8 weeks earlier. It was a transfer of land. According to that document, I had transferred a 50% ownership interest in my commercial property to my brother. My hand stopped moving. I looked at the signature block. My name was printed below it, and there was a signature above the line, something that looked, at a quick glance, like how I sign legal documents. But the tilt was wrong. The way the final letter closed wasn't how I've written it since I was a teenager. It was careful and it was practiced, but it wasn't mine. I had never signed a single document transferring any part of my building to anyone. Below the signature, a commissioner of oaths stamp certified the document as witnessed. I photographed every page before I left. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes, staring at the photos on my phone. To file something like this, someone would have needed my personal information, copies of my old documents, knowledge of how I signed my name, and a commissioner of oaths certification. I thought about the box of old business files I had stored at my parents' house 3 years ago, when I reorganized my records. There were signed lease agreements in there, old loan applications, my original articles of incorporation. Every one of them had my signature. Every one of them had my information printed clearly at the top. I had left them thinking they'd be safe. That same afternoon, I told my mother I needed to collect some paperwork from the basement. She was busy and just nodded. I went down alone. My folders were still on the shelving unit where I'd left them, but they had been disturbed. Pages were sitting slightly sideways inside their folders, the way things end up when someone has gone through them carefully and tried to put them back without quite succeeding. I kept looking through everything on that shelf. In a cardboard box near the back, I found a manila envelope I had never seen before. Inside was a printed confirmation from an online office supply retailer, 2 Commissioner of Oaths rubber stamps, still in their original packaging, the shrink wrap unbroken on one and partially peeled on the other. The order had been placed 11 weeks ago. The email address on the confirmation was my brother's. I stood in my parents' basement and looked at what I was holding. This was not a panicked decision made in a desperate moment. My brother had researched what he needed, ordered the materials to make a fraudulent document appear legitimate, gone through my personal files, and filed a forged transfer of land with the province. He had done all of it weeks in advance. He had planned it methodically, and he had counted on the fact that I would never look closely enough to find out. I placed the envelope in my bag alongside everything I had photographed at the registry. 2 nights later, I was finishing up the closing routine at the bakery when headlights came through the back windows. A white SUV I didn't recognize pulled into the rear lot. 2 men got out and knocked on the back door. I opened it but stayed in the frame. "We're looking for the property owner," the taller one said. "That's me. What do you need?" "We're here to conduct an assessment of the premises and the commercial contents." He glanced past me at the kitchen. "You don't have my authorization to be here," I said. "Who sent you?" "We're acting on behalf of a creditor," the second man said, his voice flat and routine. "We just need to document the commercial equipment." I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. "I'm recording this. Leave now or I'm calling the police." They looked at each other. The taller one shrugged, and as they turned back toward the SUV, he paused once and glanced back. "You should probably have another conversation with your brother," he said. "He already let us know that if the building doesn't cover the debt, we have authorization to take the equipment." He nodded toward the interior of my kitchen. The ovens, the proofer, the walk-in. They got into the vehicle and left. I stood at the back door listening, until I couldn't hear the engine anymore. Then I walked back to my prep table, and sat down on a stool in the middle of my kitchen. My commercial oven had taken 8 months to pay off. My walk-in refrigerator was the single largest equipment purchase I had ever made. Every piece of machinery in that kitchen had been researched, compared, budgeted for, and bought by me alone. My brother had offered it to strangers like collateral he had every right to pledge. Any part of me that had still been hoping for a misunderstanding was gone by then. The next morning was cold. I had just finished the first bake of the day when I heard the front door. I turned around expecting my part-time employee, but instead my brother walked in, my father behind him, and then my mother, and finally my aunt, my mother's older sister, who has a talent for arriving wherever the family needs someone to close ranks. None of them had called ahead. My brother came straight around the side of the counter and stopped in front of me. You're really going to let these people come after me over a building you're not even using to its full potential? His voice was loud inside the empty bakery. You're picking strangers over your own blood. I looked at him. I thought about the stamps, the order confirmation, the envelope in my bag. My father stepped closer. Nobody wants this to escalate, he said. We can sort this out. It's already past sorting out, I said. My mother put her hand on my arm. Just sign what they need. Make this stop for him. You know he'll pay you back. My aunt nodded. This is what family does for each other, you know that. I looked at each of them. My father, who had sat at his own kitchen table, in silence, while I asked direct questions. My mother, who had already known when she told me to come for dinner, and still arranged the mugs, like it was an ordinary evening. My brother, who had spent weeks building a paper trail, designed to take what I had built. I reached into my apron pocket. My mother's shoulders shifted slightly. I think she thought I was reaching for a pen. I pulled out my phone and called the OPP non-emergency line. The dispatcher answered, and I spoke in a clear, steady voice. I said I was the owner of a commercial property in Listowel, and that a fraudulent transfer of land had been filed against my property using a forged signature. I said I had documentation, and that 2 individuals had come to my premises the previous evening, claiming to represent a creditor. I gave the address and said I would be here when the officer arrived. Nobody in my bakery said anything while I was on the phone. When I ended the call, my mother looked at me in a way I recognized. Like I had done something she would spend a long time deciding whether to forgive. You didn't need to do that, she said. Yes, I said, I did. 15 minutes later, an OPP officer arrived. He asked everyone to step outside while he took my statement first, then came back in with a second officer, to speak with the others separately. I handed over the folder I had assembled over the past several days. Photographs of the fraudulent transfer from the Land Titles Office, images of the Commissioner of Oaths stamps, and the online order confirmation I had found in my parents' basement, and the video I had recorded of the 2 men who had come to inventory my equipment. The officer went through each item carefully. When my mother tried to approach and explain that this was a private family matter, he looked at her steadily and without any particular emphasis. Filing a fraudulent land transfer document is a criminal offense under the criminal code, he said. That's not something we treat as a private dispute. The bakery was very quiet after that. My brother's face had gone pale. My aunt had stopped nodding. My father looked at a point somewhere near his feet and kept looking at it. The officer turned back to me and asked if I wanted to proceed with a formal complaint. I said yes without a pause. He filled out the report, collected copies of my documentation, and advised me to contact the Land Titles Office to initiate a correction request and to consult a lawyer. I watched the patrol car pull out of the lot. Then I turned the open sign on the door, tied my apron tighter, and went back to the kitchen. 6 months have passed since that morning. The correction process with the province moved more slowly than I expected, but the fraudulent transfer was officially voided 4 months after I filed the complaint. The Land Titles Office confirmed that the Commissioner of Oaths certification was fabricated. The stamp number didn't correspond to any active commissioner registered in Ontario, and the identification number, printed on the document, had belonged to a commissioners who had surrendered their designation 3 years earlier. My brother was charged with fraud and forgery under the Criminal Code of Canada. The case is making its way through the courts. A bail condition prevents him from contacting me or coming within a defined distance of my property or business. The first morning I unlocked the bakery after that order was in place, I stood in the middle of my kitchen for a moment before I started anything, and I just breathed. Mr. Pelletier's lending operation became part of a broader provincial investigation into unlicensed private lending and fraudulent collateral schemes. I was not the only person he had contacted. There were at least 6 of us connected to similar situations across Ontario, and 3 of us gave formal statements in the same investigation. Sitting in that office and hearing that there were others, that I was not uniquely careless or uniquely unlucky, was something I hadn't known I needed until I heard it. My relationship with my father is strained. We have spoken twice since everything came to light. Short conversations, careful ones, like walking across ice that neither of us has tested. I don't know yet what that relationship becomes. Trust doesn't come back quickly after something like this. And I've stopped trying to rush the question. My mother and I have not spoken. She made her position clear the day she stood in my bakery and asked me to sign the building over to protect my brother. I made mine clear when I picked up the phone instead. We both knew what we were choosing, and I've made a kind of peace with the fact that we chose differently. Last month I had every lock on the commercial unit rekeyed and installed a keypad entry on the rear door. I also put in a security camera system, front exterior, rear lot, and interior. A few people have called that excessive. I disagree. The building on Wallace Avenue North has my name on the deed and nobody else's. Every mortgage payment has come from my account. Every property tax notice has been addressed to me. I built this place on my own and I protect it the same way. I used to think family meant something unconditional. I understand now that unconditional was always a story I told myself to explain why I kept giving without asking questions. The people worth holding on to are the ones who show up in the quiet moments, when there's nothing in it for them. When they're not there to collect on something. My Saturday lineups are longer than they've ever been. This spring I hired a 4th employee. The wholesale account grew to 3 local restaurants and I'm in conversation with a 4th. The bakery is doing well. And the only name on that deed is still the one I've always had. The one I put there myself, the day I signed the paperwork alone and drove home with the windows down even though it was November, because I couldn't stop smiling. If this story stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe. There are more stories where this one came from. Tell me in the comments where in Canada you're watching from. I'll see you in the next one.